Well, welcome back to Return to Yehovah. I was driving along today and I had a thought. It was actually something that occurred to me this morning when I was reading a passage in the Bible. But I want to share with you guys. I thought it was interesting. Let's go back to the week of Passover time when Yeshua was here on the earth. Now, remember, he and his disciples were from the Galilee, and they didn't live in Jerusalem. So when it was feast time, they had to, go up to Jerusalem, and they, however long it took from wherever they were, of course, by foot or whatever. But we know from the accounts in the Gospels that there was, his mother was there, and other women that were part of the followers, and of course the disciples went with him, and we don't know how many people, but a lot, possibly. All we know is the thing that you did, especially when the temple was still standing, is devout Jewish people or followers of Yehovah. They knew that they had to, according to the Torah, go up to Jerusalem for these different feasts. Now, Passover was a one-day deal, basically. At night is when the meal is, but I don't want to get into too much detail about that. But right as you are eating your Passover meal, you eat it with unleavened bread, and you're going into the 7-day feast called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, okay? Anyhow, so just imagine it was a required thing. I think the way the Torah says it is that it was, just because I don't have the exact verse to quote you, but when you read about it, there was 3 times in the year, 3 different feasts. There was Passover or unleavened bread time in the spring, and then later Pentecost or Shavuot, it's called, we'll get to that another time. And then the third one was the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot in the fall. But those 3 feast times were required of all males, and of course, a lot of times they took their families, women, children, or whatever. But they were required to go to Jerusalem to keep these feasts. Now, there were different requirements and things you had to do, and I don't even pretend to know or understand all the things that people did, but I also know I've learned that it wasn't like some horrible burden, to have to go up. It's like if somebody in a Christian church or whatever was told they have to go to Thanksgiving dinner, with a bunch of people, or they had to go to a Christmas celebration. Nowadays a lot of people would be all excited about that, the food, the drinks, all this stuff. So to these people, it was not just keeping a commandment, but it was also a time of fellowship and eating and drinking and things like that. And I don't mean they were drunk or stuff like that, but it was a celebration time, and God wanted them to do it for a reason. But the thing I wanted to get to today, that's just kind of the background setting. But so Yeshua and his disciples and the women and whoever else were with them, traveled to Jerusalem, would have had to arrange a place to stay and all that stuff, not only to have a meal once in a while, but a place to live, like at an inn or however they did that. I don't really know how they did it back then. The point was, though, so they do all that, and then Yeshua is arrested, beaten, tried, and then hung on a cross. And we know the disciples, the men, all but John, as far as we know, excuse me, basically scattered when he got arrested. We know that Peter followed for a while, but as far as we know, he did not go to the crucifixion site, but John was reported to have been there, and several other women. But so they saw him killed. They saw him, die on the cross and all that. They may or may not have been around to see his body taken down, but I kind of think they must have, because later they knew where to go to find the tomb. So yeah, that makes sense. But what I'm trying to get at is, now another time I'm going to do a little video after this, not necessarily today, but about Yeshua, how he promised and stated, prophesied that he would spend 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. Okay, just like Jonah was in the body of the great fish. Remember he said that? Well, I'm telling you, and hopefully you've stopped to think this through as a Christian believer or whatever, that you sure can't get 3 days and 3 nights if you start with Good Friday and end up on the following Sunday, Resurrection Sunday or whatever. Okay, so just know that's coming, like hopefully in the next day or two, if not sooner, because there's some cool things about that you have to know, and they come straight out of the Word of God, the Torah. So, but again, back to the point of this little video, is imagine after he was taken down from the cross. They know that he was wrapped in cloth and, but it was late in the day and they had to get back. I'm trying not to get into too much of this other topic, okay? But just know that the people stayed around. Now you would think, oh, our teacher, our rabbi was just slaughtered, and we watched him die and they took we know he was buried. I mean, that's it. It's over, They could have packed up their stuff and, mourned and been sad and gone back to the Galilee or Nazareth or, well, wherever they lived, Capernaum or whatever. But they were faithful to the Torah, to the Word of God, and they stayed in Jerusalem. They would have stayed there to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And what's tough is it's a 7-day feast. So right when he died on Passover, the very next day is the first of 7 days of this feast. And, I mean, we don't know a lot about later in the 7-day period, but just know that, I mean, how tough that must have been for his followers and his mother and all them. They came up for the feast, and then, they've got to be expected to at least somehow partake in the feast days. And, again, I don't know exactly what that entailed, as far as, whether you had to bring offerings or this, that, and the other. It's spelled out, but it's not clear to me how much the individual had to do and how much was just like a corporate thing, where maybe the priests would bring, these different offerings and all that. But there was definitely, time of fellowship and all that. So this is what dawned on me this morning, is just that, my gosh, Yeshua's followers not only were sad, but they didn't get to just go home and mope and cry and mourn. I mean, they probably did that during their downtime, but somehow they were in Jerusalem with thousands of other believers or, followers of the God of Israel, and they had to partake in some way. I don't know all that they did. This may not, register with anybody, but it just kind of struck me, I thought, wow, that's just an aspect that I haven't heard anybody mention before, but that would be pretty tough. I mean, they knew him, Yeshua, well enough to think of him as a friend, more than just a teacher, I think. Some of them, were like friends of his and had been with him the whole time he had, been around ministering. And yeah, it would have been tough. But no, they had to stay in Jerusalem, wherever they were, wherever they were sleeping and eating and all that. And they had to continue for the feast, just to be obedient to God and obedient to his commandments, And I can't help but think that Yeshua must have, encouraged them all along, throughout the time he taught them that you must keep the commandments and keep the feast days and that kind of stuff, because that's what God taught us, and that's what Moses shared with us, and that's what every prophet has tried to get the people to do for centuries. So Yeshua he made it clear he didn't come to do away with the law at all, right? And he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And we know that he and the Father were one in their everything, the way they, he communicated things from the Father and all that. So, but again, so I'm just saying, Yeshua would not have wanted them to leave Jerusalem, and as we find out, as the story plays out, and when he eventually rises from the grave and all, which, as you'll see in the next video, really was after 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, I'll get to that one, because that to me is a foundational, just an important thing that you can only learn by seeing what's in the Torah. Okay, it's not meant to be hidden, but it's not taught in most churches, because I don't know, they just don't look at the Torah. But anyhow, so just, when it comes to this time of year, this Passover time and unleavened bread and all, just consider what the people went through, and they literally had to stay in Jerusalem while everybody else is celebrating and all that. There's a group of them, I don't know how many exactly, but that had to, they stayed there, and they kept the commandments, but they were mourning the loss of Yeshua, and just a perspective I wanted to share with you guys. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in, and one of these days, hopefully soon, I'll be able to get the video together that I want to share. It might be a couple of segments about the 3 days and 3 nights, because some people know about it, and it's maybe old news to some, but if you've never heard it before, I mean, it's incredible. It was a huge thing for me when I learned it. I just couldn't believe it. Why aren't we taught this in churches? But you'll find out. And I'm not trying to be teasing you or whatever, but it's going to take a little bit to get it put together. So anyhow, that's all for now. Yehovah bless you and keep you. Shalom.